Nobody warned them. Nobody could have. You cannot prepare a human being for what waits at the bottom of the earth, because the bottom of the earth was never supposed to be discovered. There is a place in Mexico where the mountains swallow people whole, where trained explorers have descended into absolute darkness and never fully returned to the people they were before. This is not a story about adventure. This is not a story about courage. This is the story of what happens when human beings push past every boundary nature has ever set, and the earth pushes back. There's a small, unremarkable town sitting in the fog-wrapped mountains of Oaxaca, Mexico. Its name is Huautla de Jimenez, and from the outside, it looks like nothing. It looks like dust and silence and the kind of poverty that makes the rest of the world turn away. The indigenous Mazatec people have lived here for centuries, and for centuries, they have known something that the rest of the world refused to take seriously. Beneath their feet, hidden behind walls of ancient limestone and swallowed deep inside the Sierra Mazateca mountains, there's a system of caves so enormous, so complex, so brutally dangerous that it has no true end. Not yet. Not even after decades of trying to find one. The Mazatec people have a name for what lives in those caves. They believe the underground world is not empty. They believe it breathes. And for a long time, the scientists who came from America and Europe to explore those caves smiled politely at these beliefs, and then laced up their boots and descended anyway. Most of them came back, but none of them came back unchanged. Think about what that means for a moment. Sistema Huautla, known as the deepest cave system in the entire Western Hemisphere, has been confirmed to be even larger than scientists previously believed with recent explorations, expanding the mapped length of this underground labyrinth. But that sentence, as clean and academic as it sounds, does not come close to telling you what is actually happening inside that mountain. It does not tell you about the man whose body was hauled out of the darkness after a catastrophic dive. It does not tell you about the team of explorers who were trapped underground for 3 days, rationing protein bars in a flooded tunnel while their colleagues on the surface shouted into the dark and heard nothing back. It does not tell you about the skull of a creature that went extinct 13,000 years ago, found by bare hands, digging into cave dirt at depths that no sunlight has ever touched. That is what this story is really about. Sistema Huautla sits in the Sierra Mazateca mountains of the southern Mexican state of Oaxaca. As of 2024, it reaches a confirmed depth of 1,560 meters, that is 5,120 feet, from the highest entrance down to the lowest reach point, with over 62 miles of mapped passageways threading through its interior. To help you feel that number properly, the Empire State Building stands at roughly 1,154 feet. Stack 4 of them on top of each other. That is how far down these people go. And here is the part that most coverage conveniently skips over. The number of potentially undiscovered caves and passages that could still be connected to Sistema Huautla is immense. What that means, in practical terms, is this. The water that enters Sistema Huautla disappears into the mountain, travels through passages nobody has ever seen, and eventually comes back out. Science knows where it goes in and knows where it comes out. What happens in between? Nobody knows. It is one of the great unsolved mysteries sitting underneath the mountain in southern Mexico, and almost nobody outside of the caving community is even talking about it. The cave system dates back up to 15 million years, formed during a geological era when the world looked nothing like it does today. The limestone that makes up its walls was once the floor of an ancient sea. The mountains themselves rose from that sea floor over millions of years of tectonic movement, and the rain that hammered those mountains for millions of years carved channels and chambers and passages so complex that modern explorers with satellite mapping technology and GPS equipment and decades of collective experience are still, in 2025, figuring out the basic shape of the place. And this is where everything changes. The cave was first discovered in the 1960s by cavers from Austin, Texas, who were searching for the right combination of geological factors: thick limestone, heavy annual rainfall, and a lack of surface streams, a sure sign of subterranean drainage. They found what they were looking for. They found it in excess. What began as a regional exploration project turned into one of the most sustained, most dangerous, and most scientifically significant cave exploration campaigns in human history. Since 2014, annual expeditions have been launched under the Sistema Huautla Speleological Project, known by the Spanish acronym PIESH, bringing together cavers, divers, biologists, geologists, and surveyors from across the world, all of them drawn back to the same mountain year after year, all of them trying to answer the same question. How far does this go? Read that again. Annual expeditions, every single year? Not because they finished and there's still a little left to do. Because after 60 years of exploration, they are still finding things that shouldn't exist. The mountains of the Huautla region are home to the indigenous Mazatec community, and the expedition crews rely on the good favor of this community for cave access. This is difficult to maintain given the region's long-standing mistrust of outsiders and traditional beliefs about the caves. The Mazatec do not see these caves the way scientists see them. To them, these underground passages are sacred spaces, portals to another world, locations for burial ceremonies and religious rituals going back centuries. When outsiders come with their ropes and their rebreathers and their satellite equipment, the tension is real and it is complicated and it matters. Because the Mazatec have been here for longer than any map, they have known about these caves since before anyone else thought to ask. And what they have always said is simple. These caves are not empty, they are occupied. The scientists initially found the typical cave biology you would expect in a system of this type. Research published in 2021 showed Sistema Huautla is a hotspot for biodiversity. Biologists have found spiders, millipedes, beetles, and silverfish living in the cave system, as well as a colony of common vampire bats in one of the entrances. But the deeper researchers looked, the stranger the discoveries became. In the Huautla cave system, 7 different species of troglomorphic tarantulas of the genus Hemorrhagus have been collected thus far, several of them still undescribed, meaning they have no scientific name yet. 2 of them were found in the same cave at different depths, but they had never been collected together, suggesting they occupy separate ecological niches within the same underground corridor. Think about what that means. There are species of tarantula living in this cave system that science has never formally named, because the animals that were found alive in Sistema Huautla are only half the story. The animals that were found dead are where the real discoveries began, and they are the discoveries that changed everything the scientific community thought it understood about what this cave system actually is. In 2014, 2 of the expedition leaders rappelled into a 160-foot deep entrance pit to recheck the cave for undiscovered additional passages. They found one. Following airflow, they reached a room with large bones. Knowing they weren't cow or horse bones, photos were taken of them with scale. Let that land for a moment. Deep inside the most complex cave system in the Western Hemisphere, following a trail of moving air through a passage nobody had ever walked before, 2 explorers came around a corner and found bones, large ones, unknown ones, and they had enough scientific instinct to recognize that what they were looking at did not belong to anything alive today. Those photos were taken back to Texas. A Pleistocene paleontologist was tracked down. And what came next was one of the most remarkable discoveries in the history of Mexican paleontology. Dr. Alarcon, examining the remains, discovered the only skull that has ever been found belonging to a Pleistocene ground sloth, Myzonyx salvadorensis, a species extinct for 13,000 years, which had only previously been identified via a single mandible found in El Salvador 40 years earlier. Let the scale of that sink in. For 40 years, the entire scientific record of this species consisted of a jawbone, one jawbone. And then, at the bottom of a cave in Oaxaca, a complete skull emerged from the dirt under someone's bare fingers, a skull belonging to a creature that walked the earth when the last ice age was ending, when the first human settlements were taking shape in the Americas, when mammoths still roamed the plains to the north. That skull had been in that cave, perfectly preserved in the cool dark for 13 millennia, and nobody knew it was there. Another animal found in the cave was Odocoileus lucasi, the American mountain deer, adapted to steep slopes and cliffs, extinct for over 11,000 years. The remains of several of these deer were found in what cavers named Cueva de los Pájaros, described as probably a natural shelter that became, for the mountain deer, a death trap. They walked in and couldn't get out. The cave took them. And the cave kept them, perfectly, silently, invisibly, for 11,000 years, until a team of explorers with headlamps and ropes came stumbling through what might have been a passage nobody had entered since those animals last breathed. And this is where everything changes again. Because the real story of Sistema Huautla is not just what has been found. The real story is what happens to the people who go to find it. In 1994, a 135-day expedition of 44 people descended into Sistema Huautla with a goal that had been impossible in every previous attempt: to cross the San Agustin Sump, a flooded underwater tunnel at a depth of over 1,300 meters, the final barrier between the explored sections of the cave and whatever lay beyond. After 17 days underground, a freak hurricane came whipping off the coast, dumping 10 inches of rain into the cave, raising the water table by 20 feet, and trapping 4 team members at 3,000 feet down. 20 feet? That is how quickly the water rises when a storm hits the mountain above. The people underground have no warning. They have no way to see the sky. They have no way to know that the ceiling of water above them is climbing toward them until it is already at their feet. One of those team members did not make it out alive. Not because of the flooding, but because of what the diving itself demanded. An exploratory dive into one of the sumps cost a life. The team carried the body of their colleague 4,500 feet back to the surface over 5 days, through tunnels barely wide enough to pass a human body, through rising floodwater, through darkness. Crew members covered the deceased diver's head with wetsuit hoods during the extraction. They didn't leave him behind. They carried him home. And then, once they resurfaced, the expedition leader went back down. That is who goes to these places. That is what this cave asks of the people who want to understand it. According to informed sources within the caving community, the psychological cost of deep cave exploration is something that mainstream coverage almost never addresses. The darkness in Sistema Huautla is total. It is not the darkness of a room with the lights off, where your eyes eventually adjust and you can make out shapes. It is the darkness of a place where light has never existed. When your headlamps fail, you cannot see your hand in front of your face. You cannot see the wall beside you. You cannot see the floor beneath your feet. And you are 500 meters underground, miles from the nearest entrance, with several hours of technical climbing and rope work standing between you and the surface. That is not adventure. That is a different category of experience entirely. It is a category that has no comfortable name. But what most people are not seeing is what the 2018 expedition uncovered, and why it fundamentally reshaped the scientific understanding of how large this system actually is. At about 479 feet high, the tag shaft is one of the largest chambers in Sistema Huautla. TAG stands for Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia, the names of 3 American states whose caving communities provided significant expedition support. During the 2018 expedition, cavers pushed through a tight crack at the bottom of the shaft in a successful attempt to connect it to Sistema Huautla, a connection that had been theorized for years but never proven. Every time explorers find a new connection between previously separate cave sections, the total map length of the system jumps. And every time the length jumps, the scientific models of what the cave might eventually become have to be recalculated. Today, Sistema Huautla has 30 confirmed entrances and over 101 kilometers of mapped passages. Cueva Elysium, a nearby cave discovered in 2019, is hoped one day to be connected to the Sistema Huautla system. The gap between Elysium and Sistema Huautla's spring resurgence is nearly 18 kilometers, and much of that cave between the two has yet to be discovered. 30 entrances, 60-plus miles of mapped passages, and somewhere in the unexplored sections, a river is flowing through passages that no human eye has ever seen, connecting 2 known points in a path that nobody can yet follow. This is not chaos. This is geology, operating on a timescale that makes human ambition look very small. Now consider what happened during the 2021 expedition, the one that National Geographic documented, the one where 5 explorers ended up trapped in the deepest sections of the cave during a flood event that nobody had predicted. Katie Graham was trying to escape the cave she had been trapped inside with her teammates for 3 days. She held her breath and cautiously swam underwater through turbid floodwater, filling an underground corridor ominously dubbed Skeleton Canyon, with only a few inches of air existing between the water surface and the roof of the cave. When she emerged, she did so face first, her head tilted all the way back to put herself in the best breathing position. With her nose and mouth pressed to the slimy limestone roof, she calmly inhaled and made a deliberate effort to move forward slowly so as not to create any waves that would disrupt the bell jar of air surrounding her face. Read that again, slowly. A bell jar of air. That is what separated a trained, experienced elite cave explorer from drowning inside the deepest cave in the Western Hemisphere, in a passage called Skeleton Canyon, while her colleague on the surface shouted into the dark and heard nothing back. When the expedition's surface team member reached Skeleton Canyon, he realized the flood had blocked all passage. His teammates were trapped. I tried to look for areas to bypass and shouted to see if I could hear them without any luck, he said. I thought I heard them once, but maybe it was just the cave playing a trick. The cave playing a trick. That phrase says everything about what these places do to the human mind. Sound behaves differently underground. Echoes come from directions that make no sense. Dripping water sounds like voices. Voices sound like dripping water. The darkness creates a sensory environment that has no parallel anywhere in ordinary human experience, and the people who spend weeks inside it, sleeping underground, eating underground, working underground in conditions of complete isolation from sunlight and surface weather and the outside world, are operating at the absolute edge of what a human nervous system can manage. For 3 days, the 5 trapped cavers rationed a small bag of protein bars and continued to do their work in the farthest depths of the cave. 3 days, stranded. No contact with the surface. No way to know whether the water would continue rising or finally recede. No way to know whether the passage they had entered through was still passable, or whether it had filled completely. They did what cave explorers do in every situation. They kept mapping. They kept working. They turned a crisis into a data set. And here is what the real story underneath this story reveals, the thing that most coverage of Sistema Huautla misses entirely. The discoveries being made in this cave are not just archaeological or biological. The stalagmites found inside Sistema Huautla provide a record of ancient climate patterns, formed by mineral deposits dripping from the cave ceiling over millennia. Each layer of a stalagmite represents a specific window of time, The chemistry of each layer reflects the climate conditions on the surface above, the rainfall levels, the temperature patterns, the ecological conditions. Sistema Huautla, in other words, contains a library, a climate archive going back millions of years, written in stone formations that grew one microscopic layer at a time in a cave where nobody ever thought to look. According to informed sources in the geological sciences, the kind of climate data that can be extracted from cave formations like these is becoming increasingly important in the context of understanding long-term weather pattern shifts. The stalagmites in Sistema Huautla record conditions from epochs before any human civilization existed in the Americas. They record the climate signatures of ice ages and warming periods and volcanic events. They are one of the most detailed natural records of long-term atmospheric and hydrological change in the region, and they are sitting in a cave that is still only partially mapped in a section of Oaxaca that most people cannot find on a map without assistance. The data gathered during these Peish expeditions are shared with Mexican cave scientists to enhance knowledge of geology, biology, and climate history in the region. The collaboration matters because what is happening in Sistema Huautla is not the property of any single institution or any single nationality. The cave sits in Mexico. The Mazatec people have cultural sovereignty over access to it. The scientific discoveries belong to the global record. The team of explorers is international. And the implications of what is being found connect to questions that humanity as a whole is trying to answer about the past and future of life on this planet. What most people are not seeing is the timeline of escalation in recent years. The 2023 expedition, held in April during the driest window available in careful preparation for the flooding risk, expanded the map of Sistema Huautla by 728 feet, bringing the known length of the cave to just over 62. 7 miles, crossing the 100-kilometer threshold for the first time in the system's documented history. That is a milestone, but it is also a reminder of how much the cave had been resisting full documentation. 60 years of annual expeditions, dozens of different teams, hundreds of individual explorers, and the cave still gives up its secrets one room at a time. Lead explorers Tommy Shiflett and Bill Steele emphasized the need to monitor water levels carefully during every expedition. With teams camping deep underground with no way to contact the surface, they are always watching. Steele himself has said, "With teams camping deep underground with no way to contact the surface, we are always keeping an eye on water levels. No way to contact the surface." In 2025, when satellites can pinpoint a location to within centimeters, when smartphones can translate languages in real time, when human beings have autonomous spacecraft on the surface of Mars, the explorers inside Sistema Huautla are cut off. The rock above them is too thick. The signal cannot penetrate. They are as isolated from the connected world as any human beings alive. The travel to unexplored passages can sometimes take 12 to 30 hours, descending dozens of pits on rope, traversing kilometers of rocky passage, wading in streams, and at times crawling. Heavy packs of rigging hardware, rations, water, and surveying equipment weigh between 15 and 25 kilograms. That is 30 to 55 pounds of gear, carried through passages that require climbing, crawling, swimming, and rappelling, sometimes for a full day and a half of continuous movement before you reach the section you came to explore. And then you do the work, and then you make the return journey, and then you surface, blinking in the mountain light of Oaxaca, carrying data that nobody else in the world has yet seen. Completing 20 to 24-hour exploration pushes into previously undocumented sections, probing the emerging hydrological picture of the mountain's underground river systems, an underwater habitat, divers sleeping at depth inside the cave to save the transit time that would be lost surfacing and re-entering. The commitment required to explore Sistema Huautla at this level is not comparable to any ordinary form of scientific fieldwork. It is closer in character to a space mission, isolated, technically extreme, physically punishing, and scientifically priceless. And still, the cave has not given up its most important secret. The real story, the one that should be keeping geologists and hydrologists awake, is the question of the connection. In the Santo Domingo Canyon, the water that runs through the Huautla system reemerges to the outside world. Between the ends of the explored caves and this reemergence point, a gap of more than 4 kilometers exists. A confirmed connection between these 2 points would expand the system significantly. That gap represents a physical passage somewhere underground that water flows through freely, but that human beings have never entered. Finding it, navigating it, would be one of the greatest discoveries in the history of cave exploration. It would prove that Sistema Huautla is even larger than its current verified dimensions suggest. And given everything that has been found in the sections already mapped, it is almost impossible to imagine what waits in a passage that has been sealed from human presence since the first ice ages. This is not a story about the past. This is a story about what we do not yet know, and what it costs to find out. The Mazatec people watch the outsiders come and go every year with their equipment and their degrees and their published papers. They have watched this for 60 years. And some of them have a perspective that the scientific community has never fully incorporated into its models. These caves, they say, do not simply exist. When the dry season comes, the water retreats and the passages open. The cave breathes with the seasons. It moves, it changes. What was passable in April may be a roaring river channel by June. What was a dry tunnel during one expedition may be a submerged corridor by the time the next team arrives. The 2024 expedition targeted 2 additional cave systems in the vicinity of Sistema Huautla, continuing the quest to uncover more of Mexico's underground mysteries and to chart connections that could further expand the known extent of the underground network. Each connection that gets confirmed adds not just distance, but complexity. New biological communities, new geological formations, new hydrological pathways, new archives of ancient climate information locked in formations that have been growing in complete darkness for thousands of years. The Sistema Huautla could potentially reach 200 kilometers in length or more, including a vertical depth that could exceed 1,800 meters, which would make it not just the deepest cave in the Western Hemisphere, but one of the deepest and most extensive cave systems anywhere on the surface of this planet. That is the scale of what is sitting underneath a small, fog-wrapped mountain town in southern Mexico. That is what the Mazatec have been living above for centuries. That is what the explorers who entered the cave in 1965 started a process of trying to understand, a process that is still unfinished, still actively dangerous, still producing discoveries that reshape the scientific record. One team member died inside. Others have been trapped for days. A hurricane sealed 4 people underground. A woman swam through a flooded tunnel with millimeters of air between the water line and the stone ceiling. And every year, they go back. Why? Because the real answer to what lies at the bottom of Sistema Huautla has not been found yet. Because somewhere beneath the Sierra Mazateca, in a passage that no human being has ever entered, a river is moving through chambers of ancient limestone that formed when Mexico's mountains were still rising from an ancient seafloor. Because somewhere in that darkness, there are animals that science has never named. This is one of the last truly unexplored places on Earth. Not unexplored in the sense that nobody has tried, but unexplored in the sense that it has resisted 60 years of sustained, elite, technically sophisticated human effort. And it has made everyone who has gone deep enough into its darkness ask the same question on the way back up. What was that? What is this place? What is still down there? Nobody knows. Not yet. And the team going back in next April won't know either, until they find it, if they find it, if the water lets them. The cave does not rush. The cave has 15 million years of patience, and somehow, no matter how advanced the equipment gets, no matter how sophisticated the mapping technology becomes, no matter how many expeditions go in and come back out, that patience always seems to win.